Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Doug Bell, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Searchmetrics. Today's webinar is on 2020 SEO predictions, featuring Jordan Koene, former CEO of Searchmetrics, Inc., Eric Inga, General Manager at Proficient Digital, and Mike King, Managing Director at iPullRank. Just a really quick note on timing for everybody. We expect the webinar to take roughly about 45 minutes. Okay, so this is a live webinar, so your questions are definitely encouraged. We'll be sure to address as many as we can during our Q&A session. You don't have to wait for the Q&A session, though, to ask your questions. As the questions come up, feel free to ask them anytime by using the Q&A widget. And then before we begin, I wanted to quickly cover a few housekeeping items for everybody. The first thing is that an on-demand version of the webinar will be available tomorrow and can be accessed from the same audience link in your email confirmation. We'll also be sending out an email tomorrow when it's ready. To expand the slide area, click on the maximize icon on the top right. Just some hints for you in case you're not hearing things. Make sure your speakers are turned up or your system's volume is unmuted. Looking at the dock at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a number of widgets. All of those can be moved, resized, open, close, so feel free to play around with them. For common technical issues, click on the Help widget. But if you're having any technical difficulties, you can also contact us through the Q&A widget, and we'll do our best to troubleshoot the problem. If you're not seeing slide transitions or if the audio drops out, just try refreshing your browser quickly. And if that still isn't fixing the problem for you, just clear your browser cache and log back into the session. You're also going to see our resource list. There's a number of items we've posted that we think you'll find useful. This includes a link to our podcast series, The Voices of Search. We also have a link to our SERP Features Monitor. From our blog, SEO in 2020 Experts Predict the Top Digital Marketing Trends. Great post, suggest you read it. And of course, a copy of today's presentation. If you haven't heard of us, if you haven't heard of Searchmetrics, we're an enterprise-level SEO and content optimization platform. We're a global organization. We were established in 2005. We own all of our own data housed in our research cloud. The Searchmetrics suite is used by SEOs and content marketers in every vertical, including Fortune 500, enterprise, and e-commerce customers. Right now, we're offering a 14-day free trial of Searchmetrics Suite, and it can be accessed by going to searchmetrics.com/trial or clicking on the banner in your console. All right, enough with the preamble. Let's meet our guest today. We'll start with Jordan Koene. He's the former CEO of Searchmetrics. He's a veteran of the SEO industry. He recently transitioned into a strategic advisor's role to Searchmetrics. Before he joined us, Jordan led the SEO team at eBay, and he's spoken at industry events around the world, including SMX, PubCon, and the Digital Summit Series. Welcome, Jordan. Next up, we're very lucky to be joined by Eric Inga. Eric was named the 2018 Drum Search Awards Search Personality of the Year, the 2016 U.S. Search Personality of the Year at the U.S. Search Awards, and was also the Landry's 2016 Search Marketer of the Year. He is co-author of the book, The Art of SEO. Eric keynotes many industry conferences, and in his spare time, Eric is the general manager of Proficient Digital, a full-service digital marketing agency. Welcome, Eric. Michael King founded the digital marketing agency iPullRank. He consults with some of the world's top brands, including SAP, American Express and General Mills, and more. Michael's impressive background includes roles as a marketing director and tactical SEO at agencies like Razorfish. Plus, he is readily sought out for his contributions as a dynamic speaker and blogger. Welcome. And myself, Doug Bell, I'm your host. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Searchmetrics, and I'm responsible for creating highly focused marketing programs to deliver rapid and scalable revenue growth. Okay, great. So this is our third straight year of doing doing predictions, SEO predictions. We've got a number of great topics for us today. We're going to kick things off by talking about Google's likely monetizing SERP integrations. This has begun. We think it's going to continue. We've clustered a bunch of kind of cool topics into one bucket called technical ranking factors. Of course, we're going to spend some time talking about Google and voice data, and then we're going to wrap things up with visual search. So to kick things off, our first topic is our prediction that Google is going to continue to monetize SERP integrations. I'm going to start this off with Jordan Koene. Jordan, you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. Thank you, Doug. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to sharing more about what we're seeing and trends that we're seeing in the search industry. And hopefully you guys get some nuggets here that help each of you in your day-to-day work and the strategy that you guys are executing on within the companies you work at and agencies you work at. So first one up here, right? This is a big topic. We've actually had some recent news about featured snippets, and just a few weeks ago, I think at the end of January, Danny Sullivan brought up that any site that's in a featured snippet will no longer show up in the regular page one organic listings. This is something that was rolled out, and we've even known in the Searchmetrics data that this has basically taken effect, and there are now continuing to give that great presence for the featured snippet, but removing that link from the actual results. Interestingly enough, it doesn't necessarily mean that another link can't show up. So if you have a great diverse set of content, you can still get another URL to rank for that particular keyword. But this is a recent change that's very relevant to this featured snippet topic. One of the big predictions, going off of what Doug said, is that we expect Google to continue to invest in featured snippets. This is an important user experience that helps Google consumers, and it is really critical for brands to be prioritizing the SERP elements and SERP experiences. One of the things that we anticipate is not only will this become more prolific in just general use cases that are helpful for users like answer boxes and knowledge graph experiences, but also there will be introductions of monetization, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on as we get into this topic and how Google may monetize this. But before we do that, I want to bring Eric into the conversation, as he has a good set of data that can help us think more about SERP features and the impacts that they have on our business.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan, and hello, everybody out there. So I agree that this change in the treatment of feature snippets is a really big deal. And, there's a bit of an outcry among SEOs everywhere that we're already concerned that featured snippets were not bringing benefits to publishers. And, gee, the user is getting the answer directly in the results, and they're not going to need to click on through to my website, and Google's taking the content from me. And just by putting it there, they're already monetizing it because they're taking the traffic away from me. Was sort of the way the argument ran. So it turns out we did a study. We leveraged some data that we got from Authority Labs, where we looked at rankings data for 2 million search queries on a daily basis across 30 days. And we married that with clickstream data so that we could get actual hardcore measurements on how each search feature impacted click-through rate behavior in the search results. So the interesting thing is that it looks like that prior to this change by Google, just for clarity, that sites featured in featured snippets were getting a slight increase in traffic in aggregate when measured across the entire Google search results. So it's something like the difference between 39% overall click-through rate on the search results in aggregate to 36%. So click-through rate behavior on the SERPs went up slightly. We unfortunately don't have a measurement of what happens now that the link in the regular web results is gone. But at least historically, the data suggests that it was a benefit. So what this leads us to is the next question, right? All right, Eric, in the past, maybe there was some benefit to being that feature snippet, but now I've lost the link in the regular web results. Am I still going to see a benefit, and should I still optimize feature snippets? So it's hard for me to answer whether or not you're still going to see a net benefit, although my guess is yes. But I have to stress that's a guess. But here's the deal. Of course, you still need to optimize for featured snippets because somebody's going to be given that position by Google. It's very prominent. It's very visible, and kind of dominating the page from a certain perspective. So I'd rather it be my company than somebody else. So that's my take on that part of the issue.
That's great, Eric. And I think, just to chime in here, it's interesting. I think that this change is not necessarily written in stone. I think that Google making this change is a testament that they want to understand how this might impact user behavior across the board. And it almost seems very heavy-handed in the sense that it's universally across all feature snippets. And I wouldn't be surprised, if they roll this back. I think that there are certain scenarios where it makes a ton of sense to have the featured snippet and then the listing later on in the SERP. But, that's just something that we can all debate. And maybe they go hard and fast on this rule, but I find it hard to believe that this is going to be the in-stone scenario for SERPs.
Yeah, no, I agree. That makes sense to me. And, maybe, Jordan, what they end up doing is doing it some of the time. And it becomes situationally dependent how they handle it. And I think Google's always on a journey to find the best way to optimize their overall result. So testing here is something that, you can expect to continue.
Jordan, what's a quick example of monetization that's been occurring on the SERP integrations in the past?
Yeah, so this is a great segue to featured snippets and where the various just elements that exist on a SERP are going. Recently what we've seen in one category, the travel category, is the proliferation of hotel ads or the hotel finder. This has been a great tool for Google to monetize an element within the SERP. And we've seen a dramatic increase of the hotel finder showing up in mobile experiences and mobile keywords, where Google, has now been able to build a richer experience that allows them to serve that and then include more advertisers. And one of the predictions, and just one of the things that all of you should be really mindful of, and I'd love to get Mike and Eric involved in this part of the conversation, because this is not necessarily something that everyone needs to agree on, is that Google's going to want to monetize this more, that Google's going to want to take embedded experiences that exist on the SERP and make them ad experiences, make that a revenue driver for Google.
Yeah, I think that we're already seeing that, with what they did with Google Images more recently. But I do want to circle back to a point that was discussed here. So I think people need to be strategic about going after featured snippets, because there may be instances where losing that position is very costly to the business. And there may be situations where they do want to be in the featured snippet because it has good branding considerations as well. And I think that no one talking about this, or at least I don't hear this happening enough, people thinking about what does organic search or search in general do for your brand, and being there first in that block that stands out against all these other results can be a branding consideration. So it's not just a binary we want feature snippets or we don't want feature snippets. I think it needs to be on a case-by-case basis around what that does for your business. And I think the other point here is that we've effectively lost the data source to really understand what this new change is going to give us, because a lot of that data came from Jump Shot, and as we all know, Jump Shot no longer exists. So it's going to be very difficult for us to understand what happens here. But to the question here about monetization, absolutely. I think that at some point Google's going to figure out a way to, if not make that become something that's more pay to play, or think oriented around like you said, with the hotels and flights and so on and so forth, what can we do with these featured snippets to make them more worthwhile from Google's perspective and their bottom line. So yeah, I completely agree. I think it's definitely going to happen.
And it's interesting you bring up the concept of a prioritization or even just being mindful or thoughtfulness. I mean, Eric, you brought up in our pre-production for this webinar the Genius Lyric case, right? And the Lyric website calling out Google for taking their content and putting it up on the SERP. And like, I mean, brands need to be conscientious that this is not just about the traffic and the net worth that you get out of this. This is now a branding and awareness exercise that your company needs to take on as well.
So just to add to the Lyric case study, just for clarity for people, the company whose lyrics, what was the name of it again? I'm just not remembering it.
Genius.
Yeah, and so Google was actually licensing the lyrics from a company, I believe it was called Lyricfine. And I believe it was Lyricfine that was scraping the of the results and licensing it to Google. So there was a handoff in between. And by the way, I'm not trying to hold Google blameless here, but it just tells you something about the complexity of the web ecosystem. From Google's perspective, they had a license agreement for all that stuff, and they didn't believe it when this other third party said, "You scraped our site and took it," because Google didn't scrape their site and take it. But you still got to hold them accountable for understanding the sources of their sources. But you want everybody to be clear that it wasn't like as overt a theft as others might make it sound, right? But
Precisely.
Nonetheless, monetization of this kind of content is going to continue. And we also have to understand that monetization doesn't necessarily mean that they make you pay directly for it. If Google is able to give users answers more rapidly and more effectively so that users have a better overall experience, that's inherent monetization for Google because it increases usage of Google.
And Eric, what would you say to digital marketers? Should they have to pay for the SERP integrations? Would you recommend it based on the 3% increase in CTRs you're seeing from the study?
Yeah, well, I mean, in case of featured snippets, I'm going to go with Mike on this one. You got to evaluate the specific circumstances. I'm not sure, though, that I agree that the featured snippets are likely to get monetized, that specific construct. But maybe I'm wrong. But if they monetize that, then they would have to put you back in the regular results, for example, right? But you don't know. We'll see. It's hard to tell where Google will go with these things.
Well, folks, I think we've got quite a bit to cover today. I think this is something we can certainly debate for some time. But it sounds like we're expecting Google to slowly but surely hone in on the organic aspects here. We talked about travel and how they're integrating travel. Shall we move on to technical ranking factors? We've got a big old bucket of stuff to cover here. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Put it back over to you. Kick us off on technical ranking factors and how we think things are going to change in 2020.
Yeah, so I'll kick us off here, and this is a really interesting topic, and I've actually been talking to a lot of SEOs just about technical ranking factors, because if you look at some of the recent Google changes that have taken place, the September core update, the BERT changes that took place just a few months ago, we're seeing, and even this featured snippet, like whether or not you get to show up in the rankings as well as in the featured snippet, a lot of these things are kind of quality-like metrics, right? Like how good is the content? Is the content good enough? Is the page experience good enough to warrant a position or inclusion in the SERPs? And we often think about SEO from content or technical perspectives, but what I really want to hone in on here is that just because Google has maybe focused some recent progress around quality-like metrics, it doesn't diminish the fact that technical ranking factors are as important, if not more important than ever before. And I want to just go back to some of the really key components that make technical, rankings really critical, things like site speed and continuing to focus on your site's performance, requirements that are just, the basics. Like a lot of people just keep forgetting to do the simple things with sitemaps. And one of the things that I really like that's happened recently is Google's improvements around Search Console over the last year or two have really helped us better understand what's going on with our sitemap, what's actually getting indexed, what's not getting included in the index. And like, people need to just use some good common sense to realize that, hey, there's a lot of content getting submitted to Google and Google's not including it. What's going on? What's happening? And oftentimes these are things that directionally connect to technical SEO elements. And so I want to segue here to a couple of really core topics around, as JavaScript is becoming more and more prolific. And I want to bring Mike into the conversation here and talk a little bit about some of the requirements and ways to be successful around JavaScript.
Yeah, so the thing about JavaScript, Google has been really loud about the idea of, dynamic serving and so on. And there are still people that are just like, okay, let's make sure we're always setting up SSR and all that. But Google's actually far better at rendering content than they admit, and also that we think. So, as early as I want to say 2014, 2016, we were doing experiments where we didn't do SSR. And in fact, we were finding that, running a server-side rendering platform like a pre-render IO or something like that would cause other technical problems that would then break the site in other ways, and then Google would have issues there. And so there was a Google Webmaster Conference a couple months back, and I had a side conversation with a engineer there, and we were talking about SSR, and he was like, we're actually even better than we say, and it just aligned with what I've been seeing. But despite that, there's still a lot of instances where websites or developers or whoever you want to put the blame on still do things that make it difficult for things to be crawled. Like, people still don't seem to understand that if there's a user action required, Google will never do that. And so Google will never see that content. Like, if you're still doing tabbed content and then that tabbed content makes an AJAX call to populate that page or that section of the page, and then also the URL doesn't change, that stuff will never be indexed. So there's still just some design patterns that some developers are still doing that are causing problems. But I think Google's ability to leverage that computational expense and do that rendering is continuing to improve. And they're still just looking for ways to ingest as much of the web as possible. And I think the bigger issue of JavaScript is still speed, right? Like, they still need to be able to crawl as much as possible, and that computational expense goes up the longer it takes for a page to load. And so, there's still just people not being able to be effective at making optimal code and build experiences that are meeting that 1 second expectation that Google has in the mobile environment. I think everyone has to just really need to take a step back and learn more about the concept of the critical rendering path and work with developers to further optimize that code.
So, Mike, that bit about it taking more resources for Google to crawl the page, does that in fact impact what we can call the crawl budget for the site?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, because there's been a ton of experiments done, and not just the page speed itself, but also the load balancing of the site. So, for instance, there was a great study or case study that Jory Ford had done where she showed where they opened up capacity for the site and then crawl allocation went up pretty dramatically. So, the more that we can make things faster, the more that the server can handle the load, the more likely Google's going to crawl, and then more opportunities you're going to have to rank even better.
On this JavaScript topic, I think one more thing that I'm really curious to get your guys' take on is, and a lot of sites are moving in this direction where, you have a full stack that's just purely built off of JavaScript. So do you guys believe that Google is looking at these situations and parsing components of the site, or are they at a place now where they can rip the entire experience and decipher very quickly both the content, the meaning, the internal linking, the navigation that exists on these pages?
Yeah, I completely believe they're ingesting the page the same way that a user would see it, unless there's something that's specifically blocking them from it. You know, one of the things that they talked about is like how closely they adhere to robots.txt. So if you've got ad networks that are blocking Google, then Google's never seeing those ads on the page. And so to that end, the page actually loads a little faster than you might think it does. So, yeah, to your point, like they're seeing everything that is available as long as you make it available to them.
Right.
Eric,
I think this is an interesting.
Sorry, Jordan. Let's hear from Eric before we move on to the next topic. Yeah.
So what we actually see is we also see people who implement things in JavaScript, which is perfectly valid JavaScript code, but Chrome won't actually render it properly, so Google won't see it, and that's things like links implemented in div tags or URL implemented with hashes and stuff like that too. So we still see that out there.
Okay.
Yeah. Don't do that.
Hey, that's really good advice, Mike.
So if I can provide the overly simplistic summary of what I'm hearing from this team, don't lose sight of technical ranking vectors, guys. The foundation is that pay attention to JavaScript. Its intricacies are well understood, but pay more attention there. I want to move on to the next topic here. I think there's a lot to get about Google and voice data. Eric, I'm going to have you kick us off, introduce the topic, and take us from there.
That sounds good. And the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about just how big is voice really, because we're entering the third year with prognosticators saying this is the year of voice. And just for the record, before I go into a brief diatribe, I'm actually a big fan of voice. We do a lot of work with voice apps with people here. But the industry has kind of jumped off the deep end in terms of exaggerating the scope of its importance at this point. And so I just want to talk briefly about a couple of data points that people cite all the time. The first was a prediction that was attributed by most people to ComScore, claiming that by 2020, that's this year, voice would represent 50% of all queries. The only problem with that prediction is, well, there's three problems. The first is it wasn't ComScore that said it, it was Andrew Ng, who at the time was chief scientist at Baidu. The second problem is he made the prediction about the combination of voice and visual search together. And the third part is it was just greatly exaggerated. And I'm sure Andrew would admit that he was just off. You know, I mean, we all make the overly aggressive predictions at times, and that's one of his. But let's just unpack it slightly and talk about, well, why isn't voice a great deal bigger? There's many reasons. One of the more basic reasons is that, it's not something you're going to do in your cubicle at work. Everybody listening in, find me hemorrhoids medication. You're not going to say that as your mic while somebody's listening in their cube next to you.
Why not?
Well, Jordan, you might, but most people wouldn't. And so, but there's actually more important reasons, which even though you'll see studies out there that correctly state that the pure speech recognition capabilities of the engines exceeds that of the average human by a small margin, the reality is that the mistakes that the speech recognition engines make are far more jarring and disturbing to the people who experience them. And behind that, an even more important factor, which is the natural language processing capabilities. That's not the same as speech recognition, by the way. Speech recognition is that I understand each individual word. Natural language processing is that I understand the full meaning of the sentence or the sequence of sentences. And the answer is they're far behind on that. And then the next step beyond that is, okay, I understood one whole sentence, but can I manage a conversation where the user says something and then the machine responds and the user says something else, which is building upon the first statement and having a compound of what we call a cognitive conversation. and the capabilities for cognitive conversations are low. So the issue here is that the voice stuff isn't really fully there. But having said that, voice has a big role, I believe, in the conversation we had at the start of this webinar, where I believe that as more and more voice usage occurs, Google will continue to improve its understanding of natural language, and that might actually drive growth in the featured snippets, and we'll see more featured snippets appear over time. And I should have mentioned this factoid earlier. We've actually been measuring featured snippets and how many of them there are for 5 years now, 5 straight years in studies that we do. And basically, featured snippet growth had stalled for like 3 years. And I think they had reached the natural limit of those algorithms. But I think as more and more voice data comes out and they get better at natural language processing, that will take that up a notch. And Jordan, you mentioned BERT models. This is a fun thing for people to realize when they want to think about how mature is natural language processing. The revolution in BERT models is that Google can now look at text before a word and after a word to understand how the user is applying the word. Prior to BERT models, Google could only look before or after. So think about that for a second, because it gives you some insight to just how far along are we with natural language processing. And the answer is we've got a long way to go.
We do. We do. No, this is a really important point, and I think that for all of you who are listening, whether you work at an agency or you work at a in-house at a brand, you're all working within certain industries, certain verticals, and the most important thing to be mindful of when it comes to voice today is what's happening in my vertical, what's happening within my space, because applying these new advancements like BERT and natural language processing, which, by the way, for those of you who do a lot of video, that originated through video. Because when you transcribe a video or audio recording, the sequence of the words doesn't make sense sometimes. And so you have to reorder the words in order for it to make clear sense in writing. And so, again, the verticalization of your business and applying what's happening to voice is really important. And thinking that through is, I think, one of the most often overlooked elements. It's trying to break this back down to simple things and not just the headlines that we all read, which is this is the year of voice.
So, Eric, do we think this is the year that natural language processing makes that next step, or do we think we've got a 2021, 2022 timeframe before that happens with voice search?
Yes and yes. In other words, yes, we will see steps in 2020. It will continue to progress, but we will need to see and will see steps in 21 and 22 as well. We're on a journey. And we have to appreciate the value of the journey and what it means. So, having said I'm bullish about voice, I do want to tell people there are many businesses for which voice and investigative voice makes a ton of sense right now. But it's not because it's the year of voice across everything we do. It has to be, are there specific applications for your business and the way you interact with your customers that makes it a natural thing for you?
Well, Eric, that's good news, because I'm tired of having my 9-year-old order hemorrhoid cream from Alexa in my bedroom.
He's just trying to help you out, Doug.
I appreciate it. All right, guys, let's stick with our friend Eric here. I think great topic, but we do want to be able to dig into visual search. So, Eric, get us kicked off.
So, I kind of already teed up part of this by talking about how big voice is it really? And I say that because the next thing I'm going to tell you is why I think visual search is a more immediate opportunity for most companies than voice search. And I talked a little bit about what the limitations are around voice search and natural language processing and cognitive conversations and all that, and how that's limiting where voice is going. Visual search is far more mature. The ability to render things and discover and match images with user searches is much further along. We're already in a world where prior to the service being taken offline, jump shot data, which was published by Rand Fishkin, showed that over 20% of all search volume in both the US and Europe goes to Google image search. It's a stunning number when you think about how big that is, over 20%. So that's crazy, and that basically already says how high the demand is and how rich an area it is. And Google's layering on top of this a whole raft of features, some of which were announced at Google I/O last year. But we have Google Lens now, where it's an app that searches using your camera. So I have a little game I play with people on Instagram, where when I'm in a different city, I take pictures and I tag them with hashtag where am I, and then people have to guess. I had to outlaw Google Lens because people were sticking the picture in Google Lens and it was giving them the city. And it's really good at plants and animals and certain kinds of things. Other things not so good at. But you're searching that way. And then you have Google Discover, which is a pretty good traffic generator for some sites. Google Collections, which is their Pinterest-like thing. We have 3D image models, which Google is supporting, and then you get access to high-quality images beyond what you would normally post on your website. There's a lot of stuff happening here and a lot of opportunity, and I'm really bullish about this for a lot of publishers.
Yeah, doesn't it also make sense that it's far more mature? Because there's like definitive things to compare it against. You give me a picture, I can look in the database and say, oh, it matches this picture. Whereas with voice, there's so many nuances to how people speak, whether it's like accents, inflection, and so on and so forth. So it makes sense that visual search has far more been solved than audio search or voice search.
Yeah, no. But the question really is how much upside do we have on visual versus voice? I guess. Sorry, Eric, to interrupt you.
I didn't quite hear that, Doug.
I was saying, the reason that voice is so nuanced is there's so much upside to it, where it feels like maybe there's not as much upside when it comes to visual search.
Yeah, and that may be why people are so excited about it. It also could be just bright, shiny object syndrome, for sure. But to Mike's comment, the machine learning technology around visual processing is more mature than it is in terms of natural language processing. That's what makes it more accessible. But the opportunity in visual search is being greatly undercapitalized on by most publishers. And by the way, to get to it, you got to be taking original photographs. Lose to stock photography if you want to play this game. Not that I'm saying you shouldn't use stock photography when it's right time, right place. But if you want to get exposure online, there's a lot of opportunity with pursuing an aggressive use of original photography or original images.
Yeah, I mean, one of the areas we see this a lot on our side is the the specialized businesses, the craft makers, the people who make a very specialty product, creating images and photography that display this product generates tons of traffic that you just didn't even know you could acquire, but you just go create custom imagery of your product that you're already going to use on your website, that you're already going to use for promotions, and put this into Google image search, and wow, you just unlocked a whole new source of traffic.
Jordan, I'm assuming that LPO is the same, though, for people landing on those pages, right? We'd give the same advice to marketers in terms of making sure those pages are optimized.
I mean, absolutely. I think the big difference here is how are you leveraging the asset, right? How are you using this tool you have, which is it's often overlooked. It's often overlooked because text-based search and then all the experiences that encapsulate that, ads, featured snippets, other elements that Google has on the search take precedent. But visual and making sure that you're capturing visual search experiences into the funnel, it's just overlooked.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. So sites that are into design, entertainment sites, celebrity sites, these are places where it's crazy not to be leveraging images. Obviously, photography sites, anything that naturally has a visual aspect to it that people want to engage in. They're all huge opportunities in image search. We actually know a company that we work with that does designer concrete solutions, and they're doing really well in Google Discover.
Well, gentlemen, we've covered a lot of topics. I have to say, as usual, we do this every year, and I think we are certainly not touching on everything we would like to. But I would say that, again, I appreciate everybody's participation today. And would say we've got a ton of great questions. So I want to move us over to that area and start answering some of them. I'm going to start off with our friend Mike King. Mike, this one's for you. I'm going to read this question out, which is, with Avast shutting down Jump Shot, do we see another company filling the gap? It was among the only sources for collecting quality, aggregated, anonymized web usage data. That's a big loss. Thoughts, Mike?
First, I'm very passionate about this subject. I think the way that Avast handled that was terrible. And I don't like the idea that people are starting to weaponize the fear of privacy, and then things like this happen where a good company that provides a good service that we leverage in a variety of ways ends up disappearing, and some great people lose their jobs. So I want to say that first. But there's a lot of things that data was powering. There's a number of tools. I know Moz leveraged that data for part of their Keyword Explorer tool. I know, a variety of other SEO tools that give us keyword research data were providing that. And it seems as though JumpShot was actually providing a lot of other providers as well. So Hitwise being another one that people use for clickstream data around keyword research or keyword performance and so on. And then a couple of days after JumpShot shuts down, we all get the email hey, our data provider no longer exists. So I think there's going to be a reverberating effect across the industry. I think that there's also some situations where people may have other data sources that they're leveraging, but I think there's also just a lot of fear right now, and other similar companies are quieting it down a bit, trying to not make it so obvious that they're doing the same thing.
Erica, Jordan, you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I think it's a shame that we lost access to that data as well. I do think there's a way to collect and share such data safely so that it won't lead to PII concerns, but I do understand why they got very concerned about it back away.
Yeah, no, completely agree with everything Mike just said. I mean, for those of you out there who are wondering about JumpShot or not super familiar with this data, it really allowed you to take a look at where users were going. If they clicked on a Google, SEO ranking, where did they go? What did they do? When did they come back to Google? And this was super valuable. Now, you can still gain some of these insights by looking at your own data and mapping certain data sources like Google Search Console and your own analytics data, but it only gives you a very insular view, right? It only gives you a view of your own domain. The beauty of this was that you could see what's going on in the ecosystem. And so something will come back into play here. There are many creative companies out there that will introduce something new, but it's a big loss to the industry.
Eric, I want to thank you guys. I want to go to the next question. We've got a bunch around voice search. I think this is a really interesting question, and I'm going to make it a bit broader than its original scope. Question over to you is, Eric, do you think optimizing for voice search and snippets is relevant for B2B marketing?
So one of the things that I think is true, first of all, if you're in a B2B market, this is how things differ a little bit for you than B2C companies, at least for most B2B companies. you tend to have longer sales cycles. You tend to have a situation where you have to build trust and relationship, very relationship sell typically in B2B situations. And given those factors, showing up in voice, feature snippets results, and or when somebody's at home and asks their Google Home a question, and having you be the one who provides the answer via the Google Assistant, those are brand building activities. This fits exactly into what Mike was counseling us earlier, is understand the brand impact of these things. And for me, that B2B situation is, it's almost more critical to show up in those situations because it's the nature of the way those relationships work and the way sales are typically made in that kind of channel.
Mike, Jordan, other thoughts here? Do you agree completely with Mr. Inga?
I agree, but at the same time, I always have trouble with this idea of B2B versus B2C and how that changes things like search behavior for people. We're all people that have questions about things, and we go to Google first. So I think the reality of it is just thinking about what content do people need, and then how do we surface it for them such that it aligns with their stages of their buyer's journey. I don't think it matters whether it's B2B or B2C. It's more about just understanding what those needs are and then creating the right content and getting it visibility.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, just the last point on that, B2B brands, I mean, it goes back to my comment earlier about focusing on your niche. And some of the things that are often overlooked by B2B brands is that voice search has got to become a performance channel. It has to drive leads. It has to drive purchases. It has to drive, some sort of connected to the buyer experience. But the reality is, have you looked at your CS team? Have you looked at the support tickets that they clear? Do they have, do you have support engineers that are, busy with a tool in their hands and they're performing voice searches to get the answer to how to fix the machine or the tool or the software that they're working on? Like, there's a lot of really overlooked places where voice search can be super relevant. But again, you have to really understand your niche and understand the business to connect those dots.
Jordan, we're going to stick with you. I'm going to try and squeeze in just two more quick questions. I'm going to keep to the person that I'm asking the question of. So this is a bit of a softball for you, sir. This is, do you see a trend in video more important, less important, or important, sorry, the same in terms of overall organic SEO?
I mean, this should be a no-brainer for everybody on the call. Like, if you're not thinking about how to make video more relevant to your business, you're leaving money on the table. Our data, Searchmetrics data, shows that for the first time in the history, the most visible website within Google SERPs is YouTube. This happened just last year. And I'm not surprised. I mean, YouTube has made some great investments and changes to the way that they structure their site. But there's just one of the many channels and outlets where video content is served. And if you're not thinking about how to leverage video to your advantage, you're losing out. Now, here's the one pointer and the one direction that I'll give a lot of folks. Everyone thinks about video as some sort of like social media channel. It's not. Like, it's a channel. It's not a social media channel. And if you're just thinking of it from that perspective, you're probably losing out on a million ways to leverage this source from informational channels like how-tos, manuals, from more of a transactional channel like how do I actually do something like that I need to do on my website or on my store or in my experience and funnel. There's a variety of ways to use video, and it's just really overlooked because it's still considered in many ways a social channel.
Right, and people need to remember, people love video on these, smartphone devices, right? Sometimes it's the easiest way for people to consume content. It depends, of course, on your particular business, but if you're not doing video, then they're going to go to someone who does.
So we're going to close this out with Mr. King, and I think it's a great question. Mike, what do you think? Do you need to replace iframes with JavaScript? What's your advice?
People are still using iframes. I mean, so No, you certainly can use iframes, and there's a good use case when it's like you're embedding content from, let's say, your video provider or whatever. But I think, generally speaking, iframes aren't necessarily what you need, because to this point, to this question, you could certainly inject that same content into the page using JavaScript. So I don't necessarily see value in using an iframe unless you don't have any other choice.
Great, concise answer, Mike. Thank you. Well, folks, we've come to the end of our time. We've gone a little late. I think it was useful going through some of those great questions. There's a ton more we haven't addressed. But again, thank you for your questions. Before we close out the webinar, I'll take a moment to thank the audience for all the great questions we did get. I want to thank Jordan, Eric, and Mike for participating. If we didn't get to your questions or you think you have more, please email us at hello@searchmetrics.com. There's also going to be a very short survey after the webinar closes, and we'd love your feedback. And then hopefully we hope you enjoyed today's presentation, and we'll talk to you next time. Have a great day. Thanks, everybody.